The NBC Radio Network has canceled all regularly scheduled programs to bring you this continuous coverage of the events surrounding the death of the late President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. We now pause 10 seconds for station identification.
WLW-Radio and the Crosley Broadcasting Corporation join its listeners in an expression of deep sorrow on the death of our president.
Good morning, Carl Albert. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Good. Representative Albert, the Democratic leader in the House, has just come into our studio now. We've been talking to some of your colleagues just a moment ago, Representative Albert. What is the situation in your side of Congress now as a result of this thing? Have you had any chance to assess it at all? Do you have any idea where you go from here or what you do?
Well, I would say that it depends on what area we're talking about. As far as the personal loss, I don't think the members of the House of Representatives, many of whom, including myself, have served with the President, have ever been stunned as much as we were stunned by the untimely death of a man who was as much alive as any human being in the world, who was so fine, so lovable, who was so in love with humanity and with life, that he should be stricken down in such a tragic manner. From that angle, I can tell you that we are all sad, Republicans and Democrats alike, old and young. Now, from the standpoint of the legislative program, I think it will move on. I think that President Johnson, whom I know as well as I have known President Kennedy, is devoted. I think the Congress will move on with the program, and that in the end, the legislative results will be the same as they would have been had President Kennedy lived. Of course, this is a shock. It's a loss such as this country hasn't suffered in the way of an individual loss in generations. It came at such a time as to make it a worldwide tragedy. But legislative-wise, we will carry on.
Some of your people, Representative Albert, when I saw them yesterday, were in such a state of shock that I couldn't help but wonder whether we all know they must carry on, but how are they going to do it? Don't they need a breather to recover a little bit? I have just never seen your people so stunned. They were just walking around in dazes.
Well, they've never been so stunned. I've never personally been so stunned over a thing. When a tragedy strikes in your own family, unless it strikes by accident, you're usually at least partially prepared for the event. But here, it wasn't even an accident. It was a foul deed which struck down a man who gave forth more love and more of life than anybody that I have ever served around in my lifetime. It really shocked us. I was sitting down ready to eat my lunch yesterday when a secretary from the Committee on Agriculture ran over to me and said, "Did you hear that President Kennedy was just shot?" Well, I'd just started to eat, and I never ate another bite all day long. I couldn't eat. I just couldn't believe it, and I was hoping beyond hope that the wound would not be a mortal wound and that it would have been a bodily wound, perhaps. But when I found out that he had been shot in the head, I knew that we would never have him anymore. And I just couldn't believe it on the one side, and I could hardly stand it on the other side.
Well, the Speaker of the House, your boss, so to speak, now is the next in line for the presidency. Do you think that will make any difference in his functioning in the House? Will he have to sacrifice any of his sort of personal day-to-day leadership in the House as the next in line? Of course, he will be protected at all times by Secret Service people we know, which I think you'll find a little difficult to put up with, probably. But otherwise, do you think it will make any difference in his operations?
Well, I don't think that it will make a great deal of difference in the Speaker's operations. The Speaker has been a national congressman, if anybody in the House has ever been. He's voted national issues through the years. Time and again, for instance, I've seen him be the only congressman in either House, and this included the former president, vote for a farm bill on either side of the aisle, Republican or Democrat. He, if anybody has ever been a national congressman, is John McCormick. He's had national perspective ever since he's been in Congress.
This must have been a particularly severe shock to him, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a terrific shock. Immediately after I got word of this, and the Speaker had received word just after I did, I got a call from Claude Desautel's at the White House that the president was dead and that he had official word that he was dead. And from Ted Sorensen called me, too. And they were trying to get the Speaker, so I went up to the Speaker's office. He was there alone, and I told him that Ted Sorensen wanted to talk to him, and I told him that it was official. He didn't know it at the time. Carl Vinson came in, and the three of us sat there. After he talked to Ted and got the word himself, for about a half hour without anybody else there with us. And there were the two most venerable men of the House that were there sitting talking about this matter, and me listening, stunned too. Very little was said, but you could see that these two men who have been here for 2 generations were shocked beyond words over the death of this young man whom they had helped to bring into prominence as a young freshman Congress when he came here, when I did, in 1947.
It's hard, of course, for most of us to realize how close members of Congress were to President Kennedy, because he did serve in both houses and was active, extremely active in both houses. And it is, as you mentioned a moment ago, it is just a loss within the family almost, isn't it?
I think President Kennedy was an extra member of every congressman's family. I don't know how he spread himself so wide. And I think he was almost an extra member of nearly everybody's family in the country. When they disagreed with him, they still loved him personally. And all the polls have indicated when he'd come to the tough issues and maybe they would be unpopular, his personal popularity was still high. People loved President Kennedy. Of course, they loved the office of president. And all Americans love the office, and they love all occupants. I think they had a special personal affection for John Kennedy. And another thing from a personal angle, few members of Congress really know all the members well. President Kennedy, I think, knew every member with whom he ever served in both houses of Congress, and what is more important, he never forgot them. For instance, 2 or 3 years ago at a fundraising banquet here, a congressman who left Congress about 6 or 7 years ago, Congressman Lyle of Texas, and I went in to the banquet together. Mr. Lyle hadn't seen the president or the president him since he'd left Congress. He came over to the table and said, "Hello, John." That shows what everybody thought he had, that he really had an interest in people.
Thank you very, very much, Representative Albert, and thanks a lot for coming down here at a time.
There's still no indication that the family has actually gone into the East Room of the White House. Newsmen are standing outside the North Portico. The Marine, Army, Navy, and Air Force Guard of Honor is standing by now. And on Pennsylvania Avenue, large numbers of people are gathering to get glimpses of the first family, the dignitaries, the diplomatic corps that will be filing in for the next 8 hours as President Kennedy's body lies in repose. There was a brief scuffle outside the White House a few moments ago. A man, not wearing a raincoat, without a hat, carried a sign that said, "I warned JFK, and God has cursed him." The police permitted him to carry his placard until about 3 or 4 minutes later, when a large number of people started gathering around him. We could not tell if they were taunting him or what, but about a half dozen police then went over and escorted the man away. This has been the only incident outside the White House thus far. There are now about 100 to 150 people who are standing across Pennsylvania Avenue looking at the north side of the White House. The day is turning overcast. Rain is falling intermittently. A heavy wind has whipped up, and more leaves are falling on the White House lawn. It's a very grim day, adding only to the feeling, the sentiment which pervades every inch of this area around here. Robert Goralski, NBC News at the White House.
At this moment, Irving R. Levine, NBC News.